there was significant Klan activity. There were attempts by law enforcement officials and people in the public sector to try to intimidate our actions.
One of my issues on appeal was it's unconstitutional to kill an innocent man. And the state's argument was that's not the law. And they were right. You can kill an innocent person.
There was 2 officers who was taking me back over to the county jail, and one said, why don't you run so I can shoot you?
The Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution states, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. This amendment prohibits the federal government from imposing unruly, harsh penalties on criminal defendants.
The Supreme Court's definition of cruel and unusual punishment is the pointless infliction of pain.
The standard of cruel and unusual punishment is what is accepted in society in modern times. I think that any poll indicates that the people are strongly, or at least the people here, are strongly in favor of capital punishment for certain offenses. So if it is accepted by the community, it is not cruel and unusual as a constitutional standard. That's the constitutional test.
The Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause is the most important and controversial part of the Eighth Amendment. In some ways, the clause is shrouded in mystery. What does it mean for a punishment to be cruel and unusual? How do we measure a punishment's cruelty? And if a punishment is cruel, why do we care whether it is unusual? We do know some things about the phrase cruel and unusual punishments. In 1689, a full century before the ratification of the United States Constitution, England adopted a Bill of Rights that prohibited cruel and unusual punishments. In 1776, George Mason included a prohibition of cruel and unusual punishments in the Declaration of Rights he drafted for the Commonwealth of Virginia. And in 1791, this same provision became the central component of the Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution. The Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause has been limited and expanded by the Supreme Court a multitude of times over the last century, starting all the way back in 1910.
The Eighth Amendment is important because, quite simply, it's to ensure that punishment fits the crime. Even in the Bible, justice is defined as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I mean, it should be equitable, right?
Because the system is not set up, in some cases, to be fair. When an individual who got caught in the system, the jury trials look at the race of the person, and that person, sometimes that crime don't fit it, or the caseload don't fit the individual.
Williams v. United States, 1910, marked the first time the United States Supreme Court reversed a lower court's decision that a punishment was indeed cruel and unusual. Paul Williams was an officer of the Bureau of Coast Guard and Transportation in the Philippines, which was then a U.S. colony. Williams was convicted of falsifying a document with the intent of defrauding the government. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison with certain conditions to the confinement. He was to be shackled from wrist to ankle and forced to work hard labor for the duration. Williams challenged this punishment as a violation of the Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause. The Supreme Court agreed. In its opinion, the court said that such a serious punishment for such a minor crime was cruel and unusual and in violation of the Eighth Amendment. The significance of this case is it is often viewed as having established a principle of proportionality when punishments are handed down. In other words, the punishment must be in proportion to the seriousness of the crime. The creation of the principle of proportionality made this one of the most important Eighth Amendment cases.
In Atkins v. Virginia, 2002, the Supreme Court ruled that it is a violation of the Eighth Amendment's Cruel and Unusual Punishments Clause to execute someone who is mentally ill. Darrell Atkins, who was convicted of the August 16, 1996 killing of Airman Eric Nesbitt. Atkins was sentenced to death, in spite of the fact that it came out that he had only an IQ of 59 during the trial. The decision was appealed, arguing that it was a violation of the Eighth Amendment to execute a mentally ill person. The Supreme Court reversed its previous decisions allowing the execution of mentally ill people based on a perceived shift of public opinion, again using the evolving standards of decency argument. The court came to the conclusion that the public had shifted its opinion because a majority of states that allow the death penalty had also banned executing the mentally ill.
No, I'm not.
Yes, I am for capital punishment.
The last court case to expand the Cruel and Unusual Punishment Clause was Roper v. Simmons in 2005. At the age of 17, Christopher Simmons was charged with murder for breaking into a woman's home, tying her up, and throwing her off a bridge in Missouri. He received the death penalty for the crime. The state of Missouri appealed the decision to the Supreme Court of the United States. The appeal stated that it was cruel and unusual, and therefore a violation of the Eighth Amendment, to execute someone whose crimes had been committed before they were 18. The Supreme Court made one of its most important Eighth Amendment court case rulings, agreeing with Simmons, and the death penalty was overturned. The court stated that a national consensus against executing minors was developing in the United States due to the fact that 18 of the 38 states that allowed the death penalty had already made it against the law to execute minors. Based on this, the Supreme Court held that the execution of a minor was now unconstitutional.
The cruel and unusual punishment clause's main changes have come in regards to capital punishment. I mean, the courts have attempted to get rid of racial biases, ignorance surrounding those with mental illnesses, and really have created a more lenient view towards minors.
So that the court had changed a little bit over the years because most people is stepping up in the court hearings, and also families and community leaders who are supporting individuals to make sure they get a fair trial.
The Supreme Court has held that you can't execute someone who committed a murder while they were a minor. And then very recently, the Supreme Court said that minors can't be subjected to life without parole.
I think it's fair to say that we've had a liberal and I must say more humane definition of what constitutes cruel and unusual punishment.